Hey guys, Wes here. So I'm back with another .NET Core MVC application. This time we'll be using .NET Core 2.0, and we're going to use it to build a simple image gallery where we can actually upload images to Azure Blob storage. And the other thing is something that I'm extremely happy to announce, which is that I am launching a project that I've been working on for the last several months, which is an independent platform for releasing premium courses. So I'm going to continue making free YouTube videos. I'm also now going to be making more in-depth premium courses where we do deep dives into new applications from scratch over at productivedev.com. I've just released my first course over there, which is a complete forum application built in ASP.NET Core 2.0. It's an MVC web app doing everything from testing and hosting a SQL database on Azure, doing some Azure blob storage, and building out a lot of pretty cool features. It's over 9 hours of edited video, and it should be a lot of fun to build that application. That said, I especially want to give you guys a big thanks for all of the support that you've given me as I've continued to make these programming videos. My goal is truly to provide the best possible content, to try to provide the resources that I wish had existed when I started learning software development. As a small thanks, I've provided a coupon code in the description of this video that you can use if you'd like to join Productive Dev, and it's going to give you a discount on membership over there. So I hope you check it out, and otherwise I hope you enjoy this series as we build a gallery application in ASP.NET Core 2.0. So I'm going to try to get inside before I get rained on and get started building this application. See you around. Also, just one more thing I'll mention is that if you live anywhere where you can get outside and you spend your weeks developing software, then I would recommend nothing more than getting outside when it's nice out. It definitely has the ability to improve your mood. So I'll just throw that out there. Definitely going for walks out here puts me in a good mood. All right. Okay, so here is a very brief look at the application that we'll be building over this series. So we have a very simple image gallery application. It's built completely in ASP.NET Core 2.0 using ASP.NET Core MVC. And so you'll see that we have a gallery page here with just a few images in it at the moment. And we can click on any one of these images and go to a simple detailed view. So for now, that's what we have. We have some metadata on each of these images, including a title, when the image was created, as well as some tags that will actually build out a search feature to allow users to search for images. So our application will grow beyond this point. We'll also have the ability to upload new images and have those images stored in the cloud using Azure Blob Storage. So we'll be building out a complete MVC application with a service layer and a web layer, and we'll use a SQL Server as our backend. So you'll want to make sure that you have ASP.NET Core 2.0 installed on your machine and SQL Server Management Studio with SQL Server Express installed. I'll be using Visual Studio 2017 to do all the coding for this series as well, so if you'd like to follow along directly, I would recommend just downloading the free version of Visual Studio 2017 as well. We'll start out by using some images that are hosted remotely just to kind of show how the web layer works, and then we'll move on to hosting images locally on our own machine, and then finally hosting images, as I mentioned, in the cloud on Azure. So we'll work our way there over the course of the next several videos, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the series. Okay, so let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project, and we will select ASP.NET Core Web Application, and I'm just going to call this Simple Image Gallery, and just be sure to pick a location maybe with other development projects that you're working on, and then we will create a directory for the solution and also create a Git repository here. So we'll select OK, and then we'll have the option to choose from a number of different templates now that we're using ASP.NET Core 2.0. So first of all, make sure that we are using .NET Core and that we're using specifically ASP.NET Core 2.0. And then we're just going to select the web application, which will be implementing the model view controller pattern. And we're not going to worry about authentication for this particular version of the app. So this will just take a moment, and it is going to scaffold out a very simple MVC app for us, which we'll see here in just a moment. So we have a few different folders. We have directories for our controllers, models, and views. And if we just take a peek in here, we can see that we have a simple home controller. And this has got a few actions on it. We have an index, about, and contact action, and some corresponding views here, it looks like. And then one simple view model here looks like for an error view. So that's all good. We won't be really using any of the scaffolded out MVC stuff. We'll just be writing our own here, but we will use these directories. And you can see we have an app settings.json file, a bower.json file, and a bundle config. And then we have our program.cs and startup.cs. So you'll be familiar with these files if you're coming from ASP.NET Core 1.0. There are some differences here. If we take a look in program.cs, you can see that we have an iWebhost build webhost method here. And we're just calling create default builder on it. So there's a lot that's actually kind of packaged into this method, which is something that's quite a bit different from ASP.NET Core 1.0. So we won't go into all the details here in this particular series, but just be aware that this is still the main entry point for our web app. And then if we take a look in our startup.cs class, and we scroll down a bit, you can see that we have the constructor here, and then we have this configure services method still. This will be where we register services for dependency injection into our controllers, and we'll have just probably one or two simple services for this series. And then we have this configure method, and this is where we configure our HTTP request pipeline, so our middleware here. So you can see that we're saying things like use static files. We'll take a look at those in a moment here. Use MVC, and then we show how we actually are going to configure our routes and our routing for this application. So in this case, we will have like our app/controller/action and then some optional ID. You can also see that we have the ability to change some things rather easily here, depending on whether we're in a development environment or a production or a staging or environment. However we'd like to configure that, we have the ability here to do things like, for example, use developer exception page, where we might do things like actually show the stack trace for a particular error that gets thrown in the browser. Otherwise, we have some custom error page. So we can do sorts of different types of configuration like that here, and that's all handled in our configure method that's in the startup class. Okay, so we'll be revisiting this soon. For now, let's go ahead and create our first controller. So if we expand controllers here, we won't worry about our home controller for now. What I'm going to do is go ahead and add a new controller, and we'll select minimal dependencies. So we'll go ahead and right click on controllers, and we'll add a new controller, and we'll just make it an empty MVC controller. And we're going to call it image gallery controller, or let's just call it actually a gallery controller. And so this is going to scaffold out a very basic controller class for us. So you can see that it's extending this controller base class. This is coming from ASP.NET Core MVC. And then we have a simple index action that's just returning an empty view. So let's just kind of get right into it here. We're going to have a gallery, and so we have to think about what we actually want to pass in terms of a model to the view that represents our gallery. So we know for sure that we're going to store that in a view model. So we'll say var model is equal to, and we'll make a new gallery index model, which of course we'll have to create. And then we'll pass this to our view. So let's go ahead and create this class. We're going to create that in our models folder. So this models folder will contain all of our view models. We'll go ahead and add a new class, call it gallery index model. And so now let's just think about the type of data that we'd like the user to see or interact with on our gallery index page. So first of all, we'll have a series of images, of course, for the user to perhaps click on. So we'll have an enumerable collection of gallery images. And this will be another type that we need to create. We'll call this property images, and then we'll write our auto property here. Okay, and then the next thing that I'd like to provide on our gallery index view is a search box that a user could perhaps write a query and get images that have some metadata associated with whatever the user's queried returned back to this view. So what we can do is go ahead and create a string search query, and we'll use this particular property to store that user's input. Okay, so now clearly we need to create a gallery image model, but in this case I'd like this to actually be a domain model or an entity model rather than a view model. So this will map directly to a record in our database, perhaps in like a gallery images table. So for that, I'm actually going to create a new project in our solution. So we'll go ahead and right click here and we'll add a new project. And in this case, it's just going to be a .NET Core class library. And we're going to call it simple image gallery .data. And you can see that it's going to create a simple class here, just called class 1. And we'll use this class as our DBContext. So let's call it simple image gallery DBContext, and we'll extend DBContext. So we'll actually need to add a few packages here now to set this up. So if we right click on simple image gallery.data, so our data project, and we're going to select manage NuGet packages. And then we'll select browse. And first of all, we need to bring in Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. So we'll go ahead and install that, and we'll accept the terms. Next, we're going to install Entity Framework Core.tools. This should allow us to actually run database migrations from our package manager console, which we'll look at in just a little while. And then we'll also install Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. We'll use SQL Server as our backend for this project. Okay, with those dependencies installed, I'm just going to go ahead and close this tab. And now we should import Microsoft Entity Framework Core.DBContext here. The other thing I'm going to do is actually rename this file from class 1 to simple image gallery DBContext. Okay, so we can kind of think of our DBContext as our database, and the particular database that will be the backend for this application. And so what we need to do here is actually create a constructor. So we'll just say public simple image gallery DBContext, and we'll instantiate that with some DBContext options. And then we'll call base options to ensure that this gets passed to the DBContext base class. And so here's our simple constructor. And then in our DBContext class, so in this class, we're actually going to define some DBSets. And these will represent, in a sense, the tables that will be in our simple image gallery database. And so we're going to have a public DBSet of gallery images, and we'll call this table gallery images, and then write our auto property here. And so this gallery image is the same entity model that we would then also like to use at some point in one of our views, in our gallery index view here. So if we come back, what I'm going to do is now actually create a new folder in our data project called models. And then here we'll add our class for our gallery image. Okay, so we'll make this class public. And now we have to think a little bit about what particular properties we would like to have on an instance of a gallery image. So first of all, let's just go ahead and give each of our images a simple title. And then perhaps we'll have a date time for when that image was created. And since we'll be storing the images in the cloud, what I'm going to do is create a URL string that we can use to actually point to, the location of that image on the web, that we can then, use that to create things like image tags and links when we actually start building out our views. So each gallery image will have a specific URL where it's hosted. And then maybe finally we'll have this collection of strings, and this will represent the tags that are on that particular image. So we'll provide the ability for users to actually tag images with some metadata that we can then use to search on in our gallery. Okay, cool. So we're actually almost ready to run our first database migration, at which point our gallery image table will be created with columns for the title, created URL, and tags. And that reminds me, we should also provide an int ID. We could also make it a long, but yeah, we'll have an ID, and that will of course be the primary key on each of our gallery image objects. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is to actually go back up into our web project here, and let's take a look at our app settings.json file. So you can see we have a simple JSON object here that specifies this logging object, which has sort of key value pairs for some things that we'd like to configure perhaps regarding logging. Then we have this app settings.development.json file that looks like it logs some additional information here. With the default way that our application gets built, and we only currently have this development environment, but what it's going to do is it's actually going to load whatever is in our app settings.json, and then whatever is in our app settings for that particular environment.json file. For this series, we're not going to be worrying about configuring different types of environments. We're just going to be building a simple version of this application with a single environment. And so in our app settings.json base configuration file, what I'm going to do is create a new object for our connection strings. And then we're just going to give this connection string a name, and I'm just going to call it default connection. And then we're going to provide a connection string to a SQL database. So you want to make sure that you have Microsoft SQL Server installed on your machine, and you should also make sure that you have an instance of local DB running. So let's go ahead and check that out very quickly. So I'm going to fire up Commander here. And if I just type in SQL local DB info, we can see that I have Microsoft SQL local DB running. Mine's called MS SQL local DB. So if we go back into our default connection here, what I'm going to do is set the server equal to local DB, and then escape the backslash, and we'll have Microsoft or MS SQL local DB. And then we can name our database, which I'm just going to call simple image gallery. And we'll set this trusted connection equal to true. And then we'll set multiple active result sets equal to true as well. So this is a pretty standard connection string to a SQL database, which you may have used something like this before if you've developed any other ASP.NET applications in the past. And so now that we have a connection string set up, what I'm going to do is go back into our gallery controller, and we need to import our gallery index model. And now I'm going to right click on simple image gallery, and we're going to add a reference to our data project. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just build the project. And it looks like we have a few errors to clean up here. So let's go to the first one, which is in our data project in the DBContext. And we need to make sure that we import the gallery image model that we just created. And so let's go ahead and rebuild our solution again. And we have one more error to fix here. This is in our gallery index model class, and we should go ahead and bring in the using here as well. So then if I control period at the top of this file, I can remove the unused directives, and we'll go ahead and rebuild the solution. Okay, so everything's looking pretty good. So now let's head back up into our web project and into the startup class here. And what I'm going to do is down in our configure services method, I'm going to go ahead and say services dot add DBContext. And here we need to specify our simple image gallery, DBContext. And then we can pass it some options here on this lambda. And we'll say use SQL Server. And then we need to actually pass it a particular connection string that we'd like it to connect to. So we'll say configuration.getConnectionString. This is all provided for us, which is kind of nice. And then we just pass it the name, the key in our JSON file that we were just working with a few moments ago, which is default connection. Oops, and I had an extra parens here as well. So I'm just going to move this down to another line so you can kind of see it a little bit better. And so this connection string default connection again corresponds in our app settings.json here to this default connection in our connection strings. So it's kind of nice how simple that is to point our application to the particular database that we'll be interacting with. Okay, and actually we need to go back and take a quick look at our gallery image object, and what I'm going to do here on our tags is rather than make this a collection of strings, what I'm going to do is make this a virtual enumerable of tag, and we'll actually create another domain model for tags that images might have. Otherwise, when Entity Framework tries to create this gallery image table, it's not really going to understand how to map just a collection of strings to this object, and so we could specify it as unmapped, but on the other hand, I would like to actually use the tags to query for objects in our database, so I'm going to represent that as this tag type. So in our models, we'll go ahead and create another class called tag, and actually let's call it image tag, make it public, and we'll very simply just give it an int ID and then a string description. Okay, so then back in our gallery image class, we're going to rename this image tag. And so now we'll have a collection of image tag objects that may correspond to a particular gallery image. So we have a sort of one-to-many relationship here where a single image may have many different image tags. And I'll just go ahead and clean up this single unused using here. And now finally we'll head back into simple image gallery DBContext, and we'll add a DBSet here for our image tags as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try to run our first database migration for our application here. So to do that, we need to head to the Package Manager console, and we can get there from View, Other Windows, Package Manager console, and we'll just be sure that the default project is set to simpleimagegallery.data, and then we'll add migration, and then in quotes, initial migration. So we'll try to run this, and you can see that it has now run. It's created a migrations folder in our data project, and then we have a simple initial migration C# file here, and you can see what it's essentially doing. So Entity Framework has taken a look at our DBContext class and the gallery image and image tag DBSets that we've created here, and what it's going to do is look into these classes and check and see if it has a table in a particular database, if the database even exists at first. And it's then going to check to see if it has tables mapped to either of these classes. If not, it's going to go ahead and create them, and it's going to create columns corresponding to each of the properties that are on these classes. And you can kind of see that happening here if you just take a peek at the code that was generated here in our migration class. You can see we have this migration builder object, and then we have methods like create table on it, and we're specifying a name for the table and some columns. You could of course manually edit these migration files too if you want to make some kind of change. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And you can also see that it is setting the primary keys that are getting mapped to the ID property on each of our objects, and also this foreign key relationship is getting created that is linking our gallery images over to the image tags. So that looks pretty good. Now all we need to do is actually run the command update database. And so what this is going to do is essentially make a connection to SQL Server that's running locally here. And it's going to go ahead and create this new database for us and do our first migration here, so we'll have a schema with these two tables in it. Okay, and it looks like I'm getting an error here that says there was an error occurred while establishing a connection to SQL Server. The server was not found or was not accessible. Verify that the instance name is correct and that SQL Server is configured to allow remote connections. The specified local DB instance does not exist. So what I'm going to do to troubleshoot here is to just go ahead and open up SQL Server Management Studio. And we're just going to connect to localDB / MS SQL localDB and go ahead and see if we can connect. Okay, so that's looking good. We have a number of different databases that I've created in the past here, so I know that we have a connection. So let's go ahead and just check our connection string, just kind of double check and make sure that we have set that up correctly. So we'll head back into appsettings.json. So I'm going to move this off to one side here, and then we'll take a look at SQL Server Management Studio. And I see our typo here, so this should be MS SQL localDB. So I'm going to go ahead and maximize this again. And be sure you get your connection string right. I typed mine in incorrectly here, but we should be trying to connect to localDB in parens and then an escaped / MS SQL localDB with 2 S's here. And I had previously just provided 1 S. So let's go ahead and try to rerun update database. And so it's making a connection to our localDB instance, and it's going to go ahead and create this simple image gallery database. And you can see that it says done. So if we head back into Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and then I'm just going to click refresh here on our localDB instance, and then expand databases, and now we can see this simple image gallery database among the list of databases that you may already have on your machine. If we expand this and then expand tables, we can also see now that we have a gallery image table with an ID created, title, and URL, and an image tags table here that just has an ID and a description, and then a foreign key back to a particular gallery image ID. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to just go ahead and minimize SQL Server Management Studio for right now. And I'll close my app settings, and we can also close the package manager console for the time being. I'm just going to go ahead and also close all the tabs. And if you're tracking this project using Git, then this may be a good time, perhaps a bit late, but this may be a good time to make a commit. In the next video, we'll go ahead and complete our image gallery controller, and to do that, we'll also be building out the first part of our service layer.